Kate. Right, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. Since we sat in the committee room back on the 11th of March, the world has somewhat changed. Only time will tell whether it is forever. Since that last meeting, one thing that hasn't happened has been that time has stood still, quite the reverse. From our area, huge responsibility has been placed on our children and young people's service, along with that of schools, carers and all the third sector organisations that have supported our children and young people during this time. I therefore want to thank all those people and organisations that have worked so hard to ensure that our children and young people have remained as safe as possible, supported children and families where needed, and school leaders who have had to respond sometimes very quickly to deal with situations and challenges that cannot be found in any training manual or course. Since last March, I know that many of us have actively been involved in supporting our communities in more ways than can ever be imagined. There's been a real team spirit. Many groups have worked together to ensure that children and young people have had as much normality and continuity as they could possibly have during lockdown. Personally, as many of you know, I'm the chair of governors, so I've seen at first hand how hard heads and staff have worked during the lockdown to ensure vulnerable children and families were supported. When the voucher system had teething troubles, how schools thought out of the box, and since the decision was made to reopen, how they have worked to ensure both children and staff will work in as safe as possible environment. We must all now hope that when schools reopen in this area next week, that it's as smooth as possible so that children and young people are able to get their educational lives back on track. Over the summer, Wakefield took the decision to fund a number of holiday activities across the district, and Kath and I were able to visit some of those activities. Certainly it was great to see so many children involved and enjoying a whole range of different activities organised by community groups, sports foundations and hubs. We saw sporting and team games at St George's, spoke to the staff about how the children were selected for the programme and the genuine care that had been taken to plan activities, provide refreshments and support the children's social and emotional needs. At Frickley, we saw great use of the club's facilities and met staff who were working with and organising activities. No details were overlooked, even down to the range of refreshments the children received. Kath, would you like to say a little about your visit to Airedale?
Yes, please. I went to Airedale a number of times, and what they did there, there were a group from 5 to 11 going to Oyster Park School 4 days a week, and then on a Friday there were 11 to 15-year-olds with activities, refreshments, and it was not just sporting activities, there were craft activities as well. And this came by with 3 community groups that had worked together to put all these on for the groups. And how we advertised that, we've been delivering activity bags throughout COVID, and we put leaflets in the bags, and then if people were interested, then they could contact us. And also we went through the schools as well, so we could reach most children because we were delivering 450 activity bags a week, and also through the book club we were advertising through there, so people knew what was going on, and the children have had a really good time, and the kids have been selected through, and not every child went every day. It's been really, really good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kath. I think in addition to that, my final visit was to the old quarry on the Warwick estate in Nottingley, where despite the very unpleasant weather that afternoon, there were loads of different activities going on where the children were racing around the place, They were tasting different things, they were making things, and they were sort of working in teams. And I think it just reflected from the whole period of the holidays how hard that group had worked to ensure that children were engaged, they were supported, and they got everything they could possibly need, for what has been a long summer holidays. So I think it's when groups and communities are supported, they really have to say rise to the occasion. I think in addition to those sort of visits, I think I've had a number of online meetings with BRT and other officers. I've had discussions with Councillor Margaret Isherwood and head teachers as well to keep me aware of progress and where there have been issues, how they've been resolved and what the outcomes were. I think finally, if you ask my wife if there's anything I can make her unhappy about is the state of my bookcase. There's too many books and not neatly arranged. So yes, I love books. So very early on, Kath and I and others became involved in book distribution networks based around our emergency food parcel work in our constituency. We were able to collect surplus books, particularly children's, from our libraries, and we were also deluged with hundreds of donated books from residents. And I think this project that grew out of the very simple idea has in many cases reawakened many people's interest in having books. Through this period of lockdown, many community hubs across the district have organised food parcel distribution to support families, along with holiday hunger projects, and this date of the food parcels distribution will run into the thousands. Now, I know that have been small libraries have also had to close over the different years, and I do declare an interest in our community centre, having lost its library a few years ago. But I'm pleased to see that volunteers across the district have set up their own mini libraries that have proved to be very popular. I know in my own ward, two ladies, Kath and Anne, set up a small library in their road, seeing how it was taken off and now want to carry it on. That now raises an interesting project possibility for the future across the district, which I discussed with the library services to look at the possibility via the WordFest project, which will be taking place later on this term, of launching slowly some smaller kiosks that communities can access books from. People of all ages still like books, and that in turn encourages learning. And I think as well, alongside that and the activities that took place, have been taking place over the summer, I think we've set a nice task and target, I think, for us as an authority to run more of these holiday projects over each of the holiday periods, and also look at how we can expand libraries. So it's been a very, very demanding summer, but I think everybody has really sort of come to the fore and really worked very hard. So I think, yes, I'd like to obviously welcome everybody to this meeting, the public and anybody else, and also now ask for any apologies. Emma, have you had any apologies?
Yes, Chair, with Councillor Loughran, Councillor Kitchen, Mr Garforth and Mr Ali.
Right, thank you very much. And I know sort of Andy Tagger says he'll be present for the first hour. Andy, are you there yet? No, we'll take that wrong. Right, are there any declarations of interest from any members? Okay. Right, minutes of the Children, Young People and Skills Committee, and I can't believe I'm reading this date, the 11th of March 2020, which are agenda items pages 1 through to 8. So if we can go through on page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. Are there any matters arising from any of those pages? Right, so is any member who was present at the last meeting, can somebody please approve the minutes as a correct record?
Move them, Mr. Chair. I nearly called you Mr. Mayor then. I'm still in yesterday's mode.
It's all right, Maureen. Much appreciated. Thank you very much. Right. There are no urgent items that have been raised. So I think if we can go on to agenda item 6, which is the improvement plan. So welcome Vicky Schofield, Service Director, Children's Social Care. Vicky is standing in for the Corporate Director, Beate Wagner, who is currently on annual leave. The report included in the agenda papers gives details of the main areas of improvement, an update on the Department for Education's assurance visit, the peer review of the multi-agency safeguarding hub, and the recent service developments. This includes the improvement board has identified progress in relation to each of the 3 improvement programme priorities. For example, inclusion panels are being launched to help minimise school exclusions. A recruitment and retention scheme for in-house foster carers resulted in net gain of 8 foster carers in 2019-20 following the net losses in the previous 2 years. More manageable spans of control and lower caseloads have been achieved. Currently, a maximum of 160 cases per team and an average of 19 per social worker. A positive outcome to the Education's assurance visit in July, which concluded that Wakefield recognition was given to strong partnerships, working, reduced CAMS, waiting times, successful staff recruitment and shift in culture. The peer review of the multi-agency safeguarding hub recognised robust management oversight, good partnership working, particularly in relation to domestic abuse, a positive environment and many strengths in relation to thresholds. In response to the recommendations, there's been a realignment of teams resulting in significant improvements in the timeliness of contact and referral decision making. Ongoing service developments, including a partnership with Riverside to provide placements for care leavers, a pilot exercise to establish the multi-agency team around the school and team around the early years delivery models as part of Wakefield's Families Together. Spring Ofsted monitoring visit was cancelled due to COVID. It's expected that Wakefield will now be subject to a series of assurance visits by Ofsted between September and April 2021 in preparation for a full inspection post-April 2021. So, can I ask if there are any questions, please, from or comments from members?
Colleagues, sorry, it's Vicky speaking, David. There is a short presentation. I don't know whether you want me to show you that. It just does demonstrate what you've said. Do you want me to try? I'll do my very best. This is the bit I'm nervous about, David.
Right, and then I'll come to the questions from Catherine and Stuart. Okay.
Just bear with me 1 second. So I'm going to try and show you my screen. This may or may not work.
We'll keep our fingers crossed for you, Vicky.
Okay.
And thank goodness we're not doing it.
So can you see what I'm trying to show you now? Colleagues?
No.
No.
Right. Give me a second and I'll try again. Maybe I have to do that. Okay.
Well, we can certainly see you, Vicky.
I can see you.
Right, bear with me. Can you see my screen?
No.
Oh, no. I'm doing my very best here. Bear with me 1 second. I'll try one more time. Right, not that one. 1 second, sorry. Told you I'm rubbish at computers.
No,
They've left me to do this. Okay, right. That might work. Bear with me. Can you see that now?
No.
Yes, we have success, Vicky. Well done.
Yeah, well done. Right, I'm pleased with myself now. About 4th time lucky that was. Okay, so I'll just very quickly walk you through this. This will tell what just demonstrate what David's just said, I guess. Bear with me 1 sec. From the beginning. Okay. So I think you can, I think just again, based on what David's just said, some of the things that we know we've achieved over the last 6 months. are the following. And just to put this in some context as well for everyone, social care services have not stopped working. So staff have been seeing children. We think about 80% of our visits have been done face-to-face and in person, and we've been auditing our records to establish that position. We have retained a presence in offices, albeit a reduced presence, with some staff working from home. But we've continued to provide for all of our statutory functions, either virtually or in person. So the stuff I'm going to talk you through then really represents that activity. So as David's just said, we had a Partners in Practice peer review that was led by the Association of Directors of Children's Services. Colleagues from other local authorities who run these functions came and scrutinised what we were doing. And what they told us by and large is that we were doing a good job, but there were some areas where recommendations were made. And in large part, that was about the efficiency of the route that work took through the service and the time it took us to do some things. So as David says, we've made some changes based on that, and we're now seeing a significant upturn in the timeliness of contacts and referrals, which I can demonstrate to you more, I guess, when we look at the vital signs report later. Lots of work ongoing to continually quality assure our work. Again, I'll talk more about that later in line with the quality assurance item, so I won't linger on that now. David's talked about the work that's been done with the partnership to build on the relationships in cluster areas and find creative ways of intervening with children who are most vulnerable and least visible, I guess, over the last 6 months. And again, we do think we've done a good job of that, sort of evidenced through some of the feedback from the DFE assurance visit. Lots of work around children in care. We're pleased that we've continued to make progress. So we've not just kept the show on the road. There are areas where we know we've done a better job in line with our improvement journey over the last few months. So the reorganisation of the structure for children in care and care leavers is now all complete. The Edge of Care service have been doing a sterling job over the last few months, really intervening with children and families who've been struggling given the lack of sort of activity outside the family home. And what we know is we've managed to retain our care numbers at a relatively stable level over the last few months, notwithstanding the situation we've been in. We've done lots of work to grow our sufficiency of care placements for children. So we are looking in particular at leaving care placements, places for children to go when they leave care. And we also know that we've continued to grow our foster care cohort in Wakefield, which is a real positive. And we are working on that Mockingbird model of delivery, which the DFE have funded us around, and we expect that to be going live in November. We've mentioned the cluster-based working arrangements around Wakefield Families Together, but again, we think that the COVID situation has really helped us to expedite that. So it was probably something which we've been able to do really well in the face of adversity, I guess, and just because we've had to. So it's enabled sort of multi-agency teams to come together to discuss children who are least visible and most vulnerable and find ways of intervening with them, which is not necessarily the way that we would have done things previously, but we will continue to retain that positive and build on it now going forward. Recruitment has been, again, a real strength over the last few months, notwithstanding the circumstances we've been in. And what I can tell you, and what you'll see, David, in the improvement board paperwork when you get that, is that we've reduced from 92 agency staff in June to 57 by the 1st of September. And we've still got additional permanent employees to come into post in September and October. So we are right now really making some inroads around our permanent staff team. We have continued to communicate across the directorate. We've held staff events and we've held managers events. We've done that virtually by using different platforms. The social work health check has been carried out. That information is just being collated now. So again, notwithstanding the circumstances we've been in, we've worked quite hard to find ways to continue to engage with the whole workforce. And then just some stuff that we know we still need to do. So we're going to talk about quality assurance processes in more detail in a while, and I'll explain to you where we are with that. We are doing consistently better in terms of outcomes. However, as always, there's more work still to do. We know that the data tells us the referral rate is too high. We have too many children coming back to us a second or third time for service provision. And that's a piece of work that we're specifically focused on at this point in terms of reviewing those cases and understanding what could and should be different. We are working very hard to try and find ways to transition our young people to adult services and ensure that kids don't fall off a cliff edge at 18 when they've still got some significant and outstanding needs. Again, we are still working on accommodation options for children in care. That will be a long-term endeavour, but we know in particular that we need to develop still the relationship with housing providers so that kids can get their own accommodation as easily as possible when they leave us. We have done some really good work around permanence for children. We know we've got more children moving on to adoption and more children staying with foster carers permanently, but again, more work to do in that regard. And in particular, we're looking to expedite outcomes for children who stay with their family members so that we can move them on to sort of permanent orders, special guardianship orders and the like in greater volume. And then we continue to do work to try and ensure that we are as inclusive as possible, I guess, working with children and families so that their voices are heard and captured through our improvement work. David's mentioned the Department of Education visit, so I won't linger on that, but the information is there for you on the slide. And if anybody wants to ask questions about any of that, I'm more than happy to reply. And then that's this next slide is just a collation of the information that we were presented with in January when the peer review took place in the mesh. And we've, as I say, acted on the vast majority of that now. And then again, as David's already mentioned, the inspection framework is changing, and in large part this is because Ofsted are dealing, as we all are, with the impact of COVID and lockdowns, and their inspection programme is now some way out of line as in comparison to where they thought they would be. So rather than monitoring visits, we're now going to have a thing called a focused visit, which will be a slightly longer process. It will be twice as long, 4 days instead of 2. It will involve 5 inspectors instead of 2 inspectors, but we expect to have fewer of those between now and the time that we are fully inspected than we would have done with the monitoring visits. And as David said, we expect at least one focused visit, and that is likely to take place any time between the beginning of October and the end of March, and we are in preparation for that right now. And that's it based on the presentation. So hopefully you saw all that. I have no idea whether you did or not. But
Vicky, I can assure you we saw everything. And I think as James reminded us, we do need to be a bit patient because of the obviously the distances these things are having to travel. So yes, thank you very much for that. So it worked perfectly. So you can now tick that one off of your
got to do it again in a minute though, so
there's no pressure now. Right, right, can I ask Kath please for your question, please?
Thank you, David. Morning, Vicky.
Morning.
5.2, your 7th bullet point down, where it mentions minimising school exclusions, and there's going to be an inclusion panel starting from September 2020. When can we expect a report on that to see how well it's doing and if it is working?
The inclusion panel, Stephen, I know Stephen's on the call. This is not my area of his expertise, Kath, but I know that we've agreed some subject matter for subsequent scrutiny meetings. Stephen, I don't know whether that's on the list, is it?
Yeah, do you want me to come in? Morning, everyone. Stephen Crofts, Service Director. In terms of the inclusion panels, Kath, as you've picked up, they will start in September. There will be 3 of them operating within sort of high school catchment areas, with a number of high schools pulled together. I've met with Lynn. We have in the work programme, we've agreed an agenda item. I think it's into the new year. It's called Strengthening Inclusion. We've got Andy Lancashire and Steve McMullen will be reporting to Scrutiny specifically on these panels, but the range of activity that's underway to reduce exclusions and strengthen inclusion. So it's in the work plan for which I think we've got on the agenda later today. I think it's early in the new year that we've got strengthening inclusion. I'm just trying to find it. 7th of January, Kath. So we'll be a good full term in that will be autumn term in that we'll be able to report on the work of the panels and the work more generally in terms of reducing exclusion.
Can I come in there just to sort of add an extra observation, please, Stephen, because we've all been aware over the last few days about the tightening of discipline with regards to children coughing on purpose and so forth. And I am aware of some of those incidents last term in schools where children coughed on purpose. In view of that, if you like, tightening of discipline, given the extraordinary times that we're going through at the moment, can we be assured that the monitoring of exclusions will be taking place, and that that is as tight as possible, so that we don't suddenly find that we get these significant spikes? Because obviously children have got used to a different way of life, and it will take time to adapt. So it is a concern. So I know that sometimes there is a bit of time lag from exclusions taking place and being recorded. But is it possible, please, if that can be actually sort of increased to ensure that we certainly don't find we get large numbers of children who are wandering around? Please.
Sure, it's a really good point, and we need to be monitoring closely, keeping a really close eye on things, particularly early in the return to school. You'll know the committee will have heard from Claire Hammerson before, who sort of has that oversight of exclusion activity, discipline activity across schools. So if I pick that up with Claire, and just make sure we're keeping a really close eye on what you might consider some sort of COVID-related changes to discipline, and how that's impacting on both permanent and temporary exclusions. I'll pick it up with Claire following the meeting, David.
Right, thanks a lot, Stephen. Stuart Heppenstall, your question.
Thank you, Chair. It's to do with Riverside Management. There is a charity. And I'm asking, could we have a report from Riverside Management on the number of residents stroke accommodations that they provide, the numbers of people that live in those residents in the district, that's throughout Wakefield district, and the sites where they live. I'm particularly interested in care leavers and the transition for young children and then going into these places of residence after the age of 18. So it's a transitional period from under 18 to over 18 young people, and I'm wondering if we could ask Riverside Management to provide this information on how many properties they have, types of properties, the numbers of people in those properties, and any problems they've got. I wonder if they could provide this committee with a report. Probably for Steve, this one.
I think so. It's Vicky. I think we can. I'm sure we can provide the information that you've asked for, just in relation to the projects around care leavers, though, and to try and provide some assurance in that regard. These would be properties that are specifically for care leavers, and they won't be connected to any other adult provision or other accommodation that's there for other vulnerable people in Wakefield by Riverside. So these properties will be new build properties in places where we're confident care leavers can integrate well. You know, they're not going to be in places where they will be exposed to lots of other sort of antisocial behaviour or significant vulnerability from other residents, I guess. I don't know whether that helps.
That does help, Chair, but
Okay.
to me it sounds, sorry Chair, could I come back on that one? It sounds as we've got two levels here. One for people that comply with the system, and another system that for people that don't comply or have problems. Is that right?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, what I know about Riverside is that they are providing a range of accommodation across Wakefield district, largely working with adult services, and that accommodation provides for people who have a range of needs and vulnerabilities. We haven't previously partnered with Riverside around provision of accommodation for care leavers. We have done that this time because what we know we have is a gap in accommodation for young people who are capable of living independently but need some support, need some help to maintain that. And so what we're offering these young people through Riverside, and it's for 12 sort of semi-independent units at this point, is to live in groups of 2, so a home with 2 bedrooms, but independent, but in their own facilities, and with specific commissioned support for those young people for a period of time to help them establish independence. And as I say, these are not going to be accommodation units that are connected to any other Riverside programme.
Okay. Can I just bring Stephen in, please?
Yeah, it was just a really quick comment, Stuart. We do have opportunities in the work programme to return to this. At our next meeting on the 28th of October, we've got a focus on corporate parenting, which will include the support to care leavers. So I think there's an opportunity to say more then about the Riverside service and development. So an opportunity to come back to things then, but also on the 4th of February, we've proposed in the work programme is a focus on transition to adulthood, looking more broadly at children and young adults within the district and the support that's in place as they move into adulthood, looking more broadly across transition to adult social care, housing support, homelessness, and health related services. So I think we've a couple of opportunities later in the year in terms of the work of the committee to return to some of the issues that you raised there in terms of support at transition particularly for vulnerable individuals within the district.
Can I add on to that, Stephen, as well? Making sure that the financial support, obviously, and the money that these young people receive is adequate, or sure. It does match the outgoings that these young people face, because I know there were issues in the past, weren't there, in terms of a mismatch between what was coming into them and what was expected to be going out to them. So I think obviously we just have to have a quick, if you like, review of the financial situation as well for those young people.
Sure.
Okay,
yes, we can include that too.
Okay.
So, Chair, Stuart.
Yes, Stuart.
Could I just say that both Vicky and Stephen are aware of the concerns that I will bring into the meeting, and thanks for the answers. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Andy first because Kath's already had one question. So Andy, can I come to you, please? And I'll go back to Kath.
Hopefully it's a work. Sorry for being a bit late joining the meeting.
It's a delight to have you, Andy.
It's a pleasure to be here, David. I'm particularly interested to hear how effective and efficient arrangements have been to support and monitor children and young people who have been placed out of the district, particularly in regard to the current COVID situation.
Okay, excuse me, it's Vicky. We, as you know, we've got a range of KPIs and performance data that we look at very regularly. And I think when I show you the vital signs report later, you'll be able to see that we've really maintained our contact, our direct contact with children. And as I said earlier, we've been really careful to check that when people are recording that they've seen children and been in touch with them, that there's some quality around that. So again, when I come to the quality assurance report later, you'll see the volume of auditing and sampling work that we've done over the last few months. And what I can tell you is we've done almost as much in the last 3 months as we did in the whole of last year. So we've been very careful actually to look in on the work of our staff and ensure that what they say they're doing by way of recording something and is ticking a box for the KPI, that we've checked the quality of that and the impact of that for children. The commissioning team who are responsible for identifying the placements that we put children in with placement providers have continued to be in close contact with them. They have a framework with which they engage, and that means that they establish certain quality checks around the private providers as well. I think really positively what we haven't had is huge numbers of placement disruptions. We haven't had children needing to move placement because providers have not been able to continue to provide care through COVID. Actually, in the last month, our level of placement disruption declined. And again, we think that's because of the amount of support and input that we've had with some of these children, where we knew actually placements may be difficult, that they were quite challenging kids who would need an awful lot of help. We used our Edge of Care team in a slightly different way, and we had our Edge of Care team engaging with children where we knew that providers would find it difficult to meet their needs, given that kids were not going to always be in school as they had been, and the like, and not necessarily carrying out external activities or having external contact with families as they would have been in the same way. We pulled in services from across the board, so youth services, youth offending services have helped really to shore up some of the placements for our kids, both in-house and externally when we've needed to do that. So we've had a range of work going on, but we've been really careful to target that to the kids who needed it most, and bearing in mind the placement providers that might find it most challenging to keep the kids in their care that we knew were most vulnerable to disruption. I don't know if that answers the question.
I thank you, yes. I wonder about for 18 to 25. Okay.
For our care leavers, we've done very similar things. So again, when I show you the vital signs report, I don't know, actually, I'm not sure if it is in the vital signs, the keeping in touch visits, but we've monitored keeping in touch visits with care leavers very closely. We've done similar things in terms of checking the quality of those visits. We've actually just carried out a large scale sample of the work with care leavers, and that's considered the content and quality of the visit. And the feedback about that was that actually the direct work with kids was a real strength. So very similar things. We've put services in place for kids who are leaving care, just as we have for kids in care, where we've known that they needed some sort of strengthened oversight or some additional help at this particular point in time. And we've done that by drawing on the range of services that we have.
Are you all right with that, Andy? Okay. Right. Catherine.
Morning again. I've got a number of questions actually, David.
I thought you might have. I have as well, but I'm waiting to the end. Go on.
I'm still on 5.2, bullet point 9. It's your last bullet point where it mentions, since COVID lockdown, robust arrangements have been operating to monitor attendance at school and to identify and support and keep a line of sight on vulnerable children. Does those vulnerable children, does that include children with disabilities, children with special educational needs, children with an EHCP plan? Because it says it in here that you've been keeping in regular contact weekly, it says in brackets. So has that happened to all children who are vulnerable with special educational needs who have an EHCP plan across the district?
The arrangements that have been operating, Kath, have been led by the discussions in the new cluster areas. So as you know, we've got 6 of these areas across Wakefield. And what we were doing pre-COVID is aiming to build the co-location and integration of multi-agency services. And I think COVID's given us, probably a bit perversely, a real opportunity to sort of galvanise the will to do this and do it quickly. And so what those multi-agency teams around the schools in those areas have been doing is meeting regularly and identifying between them the children that they are most concerned about. And that's because of an understanding about their level of vulnerability and need, and also because of the fact that they may not have been as visible as they otherwise would have been. And when they've identified their children that they're most worried about, they've reg-rated them. So the children that they're most worried about have been the children they've identified as being in the red category. And then within that multi-agency team, someone has taken the lead, essentially, on ensuring that that child is okay and receives the help that they need. And that's included all children, so including children with special educational needs and disabilities, but including other children who were subject of early help arrangements, children who were on children in need or child protection plans, and kids maybe weren't even within that sort of group, but schools or others just knew that they were going to struggle. So the cluster working arrangements have very much taken a lead on that, and that's some of the stuff that was discussed in detail with the DFE, with our DFE colleagues when they conducted the assurance visit. In relation in particular to children with special educational needs and disabilities, all of our services for those children have continued to function. So all of our residential respite facilities have been open and running. We've had a slight reduction in capacity, but we've had a slight reduction in take-up as well, because for obvious reason, early in the pandemic, some parents chose not to send their children, they chose to keep them at home. And so the services for those children have had to reshape, and we've had to think about offering more help sort of to families in their homes, where that's been what carers have wanted. Again, some families have not wanted as much help in the home for obvious reason. But just to try and provide some assurance, the services have all continued to function, and the children that we've been most worried about have all continued to be visible.
Thank you, but I know schools have been contacting children as well, but
yes,
have our resource centres, such as children with autism, children that are deaf, children that have got sight problems, have our resource centres, have they contacted the children that go to the resources? Do you know?
Yeah, we have our short breaks provision, which operates from Wasdale Resource Centre, and we have overnights provided from Wasdale. We also have overnights provided from Sarhouse, and all of those services have continued to function as they usually would. The children have, all of those children have assessments in relation to their level of need, and they have identified short break arrangements, whether that's through provision of an overnight stay or a short break provided in the community through services going into their homes, and those provisions have continued to function.
Thank you.
Obviously, Kevin, I think one of the things Kevin's identified, what's an ATP plan, please. I think it's sometimes when you're sort of going through all the documentation, you know, there is some sort of acronyms or sort of just sort of notes on letters for things. Sometimes we just need to forget, you know, some of us are not as knowledgeable on these things.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I even know that one, David. If you could draw me to the paragraph, I'll have a go.
I must admit, whilst Catherine's been talking, asking questions, I have actually been trying to Google it, and there's something in the COVID-19 response from governments on ATPs.
Right.
So there's something lurking there.
If
we've all been
somebody
thought out on that one. Thanks, Kevin, for that. Right, have any other members got any questions at this point in time on this section? Because obviously,
Chair, it's Monica. I've been trying to put questions in, and I don't think they've been picked up.
No, I haven't seen it, but Monica, you've got the floor.
Thank you. Am I on mute now?
Yes, we can hear you. Oh, you've gone off, Monica. Right, yeah. You're back on again. Off again. Come back on again, Monica. Press your mute button, unmute. At the bottom left hand of your screen, Monica, Can you press the unmute? Right. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
you got me. Vicky, congratulations on everything. How hard you've worked, and this has been a steep learning curve for keeping up with things. I'd like to ask 2 questions, if I may. One is about re-referrals. Does that refer to children who have actually been, case has been closed and then they've been picked up again for further issues, or does it mean that they have to be referred a second time before it was picked up? That's one. I don't quite understand re-referrals. And the second one was about CAMS and the waiting list being reduced, which is really good news. Does that mean that there's been further funding and extra staffing working with CAMS, because there seems to be an increase in mental health and the waiting list has gone down, which is really good. So I'd like to see what's behind that. Thank you, Vicky.
So I'll deal with re-referrals first of all, if that's okay. So the re-referral measure is a statutory indicator. It's something that we've got to report to the DFE on, and it comes from the statutory guidance, working together to safeguard children. So when people out there, anybody has a concern about a child and they contact social care services, they will make what's called a referral. So they will tell us a piece of information, we will record it, we will find out more and then determine what we need to do in response to that. And having recorded that piece of information as a referral, it obviously gets logged down on our system. And then at any future point within the next year, if another person out there makes similar call to us and gives us similar information, that will count as a re-referral. So in response to the question, I guess, if the original referral is passed through to a social work team and some kind of intervention is carried out, then that case will have closed, and then another piece of information may have come back to us at some later point within the next year. That's the measure. It is possible that the MASH may decide with the original query or concern that there isn't a need for a social work intervention. So it may be that the social worker's never seen that child when the re-referral comes in. I guess, but the significance of the indicator is that if we have too many re-referrals, the suggestion is that we're not getting it right the first time around, I guess. If that helps. The usual re-referral rate is somewhere around 20%. We are higher than that. We were at 34% last month, so we know we've got work to do on this. We've done lots of auditing. We understand the practice well, and I can give you more information, I guess, when we get to the vital signs report. If you want, I can explain where we are with that in more detail. Does that answer that question?
Yes, that's fine, that's fine.
Okay, so CAMS, Stephen, am I best to do this, or are you?
I can say a bit generally. I don't know if you've got a bit more information about CAMS and children in care, but just first of all, Monica, generally in terms of the CAMS service, it's commissioned by the Clinical Commissioning Group here in Wakefield. It's delivered by SWIFT, the South West Yorkshire Foundation Trust. That's the arrangements for CAMS services. And what we've seen is over the last 12-18 months, there has, as part of a national programme of investment, there has been new investment into CAMS services. So we have seen extra funding. We've seen an expansion of things like home-based treatment, expansion of things like crisis type support. And again, back to the work programme, but in April we've got a specific deep dive or focus in terms of the committee's work on looking at emotional health and well-being. But the general picture is this has been it's been a national priority, and we've seen that play out here in Wakefield with additional investment in some of the services that I described there. What we've also seen in Wakefield, I think if CAMS were here, if SWIFT were here, if the CCG were here, they would talk about how the service is very much, in terms of its staffing, has very much stabilised. with moving towards full staffing. Historically, for the past 18 months, they were carrying lots of vacancies with lots of turnover of therapeutic staff at a number of different levels. That has significantly stabilised. We're seeing a much more stable service, much better able to respond to referrals, reduce the waiting list across the range of different therapies. That's all a bit general, but that is the general context. We've got some more detailed time in April, some more focused time in April to within this committee, when we can bring in CCG and CAMS colleagues to talk in a bit more detail. But there is a general picture of increased investment and a more stable service, and of course that's impacting on the timeliness that children and young people are able to access the service. A part of the CAMS service is some more targeted and swifter responses to children in care. I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add there, Vicky. I understand that the service response is currently good.
Yeah, we think we're doing well with responses to children in care who have emotional and psychological needs. We are carrying out assessments called Strengths and Difficulties questionnaires for children in care now, and we are tracking that, and that tells us the extent to which we should be concerned about the emotional well-being of the kids that we're looking after. Having done that and having identified the concern for them, we then refer those children through into our joint emotional health and wellbeing and assertive outreach teams. So that's the social care and CAMS teams that deal with emotional needs of children in care. And what we know is they are triaged immediately within the week. And what we also know is that they receive a service within 4 weeks as a maximum. So children in care are receiving an expedited service right now. The data set is in development. We are QAing our work jointly together, so we're keeping an oversight of the impact that has for children in care. And we've also got some joint operating models and delivery pathways with CAMS and the social care side of that work, which is beginning to work quite well for us.
Thank you, Vicky. You all right with that?
Yes, okay. Thank you, Chair. That's very good, positive news. Great support, between the agencies, because I know that CAMS at one time, it was a long waiting list, and a lot of people just were left by the wayside. So that's really good, positive news. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to add certainly that there has been a very noticeable change in the CAMS service. So yes, Vicky, you want to say something?
David, it's Cynthia.
I'm sorry, Cynthia.
Yeah, I'm having the same problem as Monica. I can't get my messages typed through. I just wanted to ask how the COVID pandemic has affected referrals, if any.
Okay, I can show you that when we come to the vital signs report. What you will see, I think, is that we've had a very slight reduction. Not much at all. We are quite unusual, actually, as compared to other regional local authorities who had quite a significant decline in their referral rate during the early stages. We didn't. Good. And I think we really put that down to the fact that we've done all that multi-agency work out in the community with partners to say to them, tell us when you're worried. What we've seen from that is that our numbers have remained fairly steady. We're slightly down on where we would have been this time last year, but not significantly so. I guess it's going to remain to be seen the extent to which there is a spike in referrals in September as kids go back to school and again begin to be more visible. And I think we expect that there will be some of that. But I don't think we're expecting this tidal wave that some other local authorities are, because they've had such reduced numbers.
Okay, thanks, Vicky.
Having said that, though, Vicky, nationally there is that concern, as you've said, that there could well be a potential spike. Have we got additional capacity in the system just in case?
We've not got additional capacity, David, but again, when we come to the vital signs report, I can show you that the services are looking fairly healthy in terms of volumes. So we know we've done all that work in the MASH over the last few months to ensure that we're as efficient as we can in progressing the referrals through. We're now dealing with the vast majority of referrals within the 24-hour period, somewhere between 80 and 90%, which is the best performance we've had through the whole of the improvement journey, and that's been sustained now for a couple of months. So we know that the MASH are well prepared to deal with a modest increase in volume, I would say. And then within the social work teams, again, the case holding is the lowest that we've seen throughout the whole of the improvement journey. So the most up-to-date position is that we are between 17 and 18 cases per worker on average. So again, we've got some capacity there to deal with any increase that might come in September. If we get a huge hit, if we do, then obviously we'll look at that and respond to it. We've got some potential for, subject to cost, obviously, for increased staffing, given that we've got permanent workers joining us in large number, and we've still got agency staff in place. So we may have to look at the extent to which agency staff leave us immediately, I guess, if we end up with a very significant additional volume. But I don't think we're expecting that will be the case here.
Okay, thanks a lot, Vicky. Right, I'll take Kathy, then Kevin, and I'll come back to Kath. Okay, so Kathy, over to you.
Hi, it's just a comment really. I did end up doing a virtual visit to CAMS last week and was really encouraged by what they were saying and really just sort of confirming what's already been said, that they've kind of responded to COVID by a different way of working that actually will benefit the working of the system going forward. So just a big well done really, and just to say that was a really interesting sort of time that I spent the other afternoon.
Okay, right, thanks Kathy for that. Yeah, right, Kevin.
Yes, I wanted to go back to this issue of re-referrals. Now, I appreciate Vicky said it's something that they're looking at, so I'm not necessarily expecting a response now. But I was struck by this disparity between 34% Wakefield, 24% national. Now, the kind of things that immediately jump to mind is, are we kind of closing cases a bit too quick? Because obviously that would tie in with what Vicky was saying a little bit later about our average caseload per worker, dropping to quite a low level. Now, if that's simply administrative tidiness in terms of closing cases down on the books, which in reality are already dead cases, well, that's fine and that's accurate. But if what's happening is that we're closing cases prematurely in if you like, an over-enthusiastic attempt to keep the total number of cases down, then that's not really a very good thing. And because there's got to be some explanation for that really big 10 percentage points disparity, between Wakefield and National. As I say, Vicky said it's something they're looking at and they're going to come back on. So not necessarily expecting an off-the-cuff response to that now, but it is something that I think when it does come back, I would hope that these issues are actually fairly seriously addressed. Thanks, Chair.
Right, thanks, Kevin.
David, can I just say something about that?
Of course you can.
Okay. It is on our improvement board actually next week for a deep dive around the re-referral issue, and we have had it there before within about the last 3 months. We did a big piece of work. I'm going back to about May or June now, as the re-referral rate started to really rise earlier this year. We did a big piece of work to examine the re-referrals that we'd had over a 2-month period, and that report was presented to the improvement board, as I say, about 3 months ago. What that piece of work identified was that there were 3 groups of re-referrals effectively. One group, and that was about 1/3 of the re-referral volume, were those re-referrals that we would have got in any event. So we couldn't have prevented them. They were for entirely different reasons, and those re-referrals were not foreseeable. So we would always have had those. The other 1/3 were about those cases where within the partnership, somewhere at an earlier stage in the child's journey, other things could have been done to prevent the referral to social care. So effectively, the service manager group that were reviewing those referrals was saying the referral wasn't really needed. People didn't need to tell us about it at that point. And so again, it could have been avoided for that reason. The other third, so we're talking about roughly 10, just over 10%, were cases where we believed as a social care service we could have done something different, and some additional piece of work or some additional piece of intervention might have negated the need for the re-referral. Sometimes that was just about handing the work over to another agency when we moved away, doing that effectively. And so there were a range of reasons within that 10% around what the work could or should have looked like, I guess. And just to provide some assurance, what the service managers were very clear about when they were reviewing that group is that no children were left at risk. We weren't worried that children hadn't received services such that they were unsafe in that group. We are reviewing these all the time now. So every month, the service manager group, including the early help service manager, the MASH service manager and the locality service managers meet together to look at all cases which involve a re-referral. And as a result of that, the specific feedback is going into the teams where the difference could be made. And as I say, we've got a deep dive focus on this at the improvement board, which Stephen and I are going to be leading next week. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, that's fine, Vicky. Thank you very much.
Sorry, just one other comment on this, David. I did say earlier the re-referral rate is about any referral that comes back within the last year. So it does take a little bit of time for these things to work through the system. And if you think about where we were a year ago in terms of the quality of our practice, we are looking now when we're examining re-referrals at some of the work that was done a year ago. Yeah. So it's not necessarily about the work that's being done now, I guess is what I would say, this measure, and it will take a little time to work through the system.
Right, but obviously it is something that we will clearly be monitoring over the next few months or so. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Vicky. Right, Maureen, your question.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know who'll be able to answer this, but it was just it was a message I had from a concerned parent, and they'd actually emailed the schools that their children actually went to, and it was about the coronavirus. And it was the thing what was going round on social media about can children be taken from school and detained without their parents' consent if it is believed they have coronavirus. And it appears on the Children's Commission website, but I don't fully understand it.
I think could I make, because I'm not sure Stephen or I will be able to answer that.
Can I
need to review that? Yeah.
Can I say something? Yeah. Monica Green is dealing with that inquiry at the moment. So, and I think she's been on leave, hasn't she? So, I think
but she's back, David. Yes.
Yeah, so she's in the process of preparing a response on that one. But I think it was a very important comment that Maureen's and question that Maureen's asked there, because it was something that did cause a lot of angst amongst parents. That comment that was going around on social media, hence why we've asked for a response from the team.
Yeah, I mean, I have conversed with you, David, about it anyway, but I just didn't, I know you said Monica were dealing with it, but I think it's just, to get it out there that this is what's
absolutely right.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Right, there are a few questions that I've got, but I think what I'm going to do is, because there's little questions like, what is the Mockingbird model that you've made reference to at the top of page 11?
Explain that, David. I can do it quickly if you want.
If you wish to, yes.
Okay. So Mockingbird is a programme around recruitment and development of support for foster carers. So it came from the work that was sort of done in relation to the English Innovation Programme that the Department for Education began about 6 or so years ago. And lots of local authorities have now begun to put that in place. And we applied for some DFE funding related to that development in Wakefield earlier this year, and we were successful with it. What it basically means is that in a Mockingbird style approach of fostering, you create a little bit of a hub and spoke arrangement. So you have what's called a hub carer who doesn't have a full-time placement with them, but they offer sort of effectively respite placements, mentoring and support to other foster carers in that cluster. Typically, you have around 6 or 7 foster carers in these clusters, and they operate as a self-supporting environment, if you like. They'll develop sort of relationships, almost akin to a bit of a family arrangement, really, where a child will develop relationships with the hub carer. They will spend time with them almost as if they're going to stay with a family member overnight if the foster carers are going out somewhere or need a bit of a break. But it's a sustainable support system, really, for children and foster carers who are with them. So we're working now to put our first Mockingbird constellation, they're called, in place, and then we'll have a second one early next year.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. There's one other issue, but I think I'd probably like this to maybe sort of come on to the agenda for next meeting. At the bottom of page 10, the next to bottom bullet point, a transformation programme to improve the in-house residential estate, including for children with SEN and disabilities and so forth, is being established. I have had a conversation with Councillor Margaret Isherwood about this. I'd make more flesh on that sort of detail, because I think it is, which is a very important. Sorry, that's my phone going off. My council one, I might add. So I'd probably like a bit more detail on, because I think it is something that is important, I think, for us as an authority to be moving into, so that we are keeping things in house. So probably like a bit more detail on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, it is, and it's a big agenda item, David. So it's yeah.
So I'd like more detail on that one. Right. Can I draw a line at this point? Are there any other questions at this point, or can I draw a line under it? Okay. Right. So I know that obviously Andy Lancashire has appeared. So welcome, Andy. I know you've been elsewhere on another platform this morning. In order to give a bit of time, would you all like to have a comfort break in the comfort of your homes or wherever you are? So maybe sort of give, say, 5 minutes, please, and then we'll come back and get going again. Okay, so 5 minutes, please, or should we say 11:15? Make it easy, 11:15. Okay, back online, back on 11:15. And Okay, all right, thanks. So can we have the camera back on, please? Okay, thank you everybody, and welcome back to the second half. Can we go to agenda item number 7, please, which is the exam results? This is one we wanted because obviously with all the publicity that's gone on with regards to the exam results, and particularly with regard to the education of what call yesterday, I have asked Andy to give us a brief review, please, of how things have gone on in Wakefield with regards to the GCSE, A-levels and the BTECs. So welcome, Andy, and over to you, please.
Thanks, David. So yeah, as elected members will be aware, there's been obviously a lot of interest and discussion and U-turns around the Key Stage 5, Key Stage 4 results and the process that was originally put in place by the DFE and Ofqual. Just to remind you, this was around standardised grades that were generated by Ofqual and the infamous algorithm. This obviously caused a great deal of, I think, stress for young people, but also consternation, I think, across the landscape in terms of significant numbers of young people, particularly disadvantaged young people, having their grades downgraded when compared to what were termed centre assessed grades, as a term that you'll hear, which i.e. those were those grades that were submitted by the teachers who know their children best. As you'll know, the government subsequently performed a U-turn and announced that all students would receive whichever was the highest of their centre assessed grade or the standardised grade. As we know, the issuing of BTEC and other vocational results was delayed, and it was due to be completed by Friday the 28th of August. Some of that is ongoing, and obviously we're looking at collating that information across the district as schools and colleges return. And we'll continue with that, and obviously we can bring back the overall data back into overview and scrutiny as we would normally do later in the autumn term, once we've got a sort of headline pictures around that. In terms of headlines, I'll just finish off with Key Stage 5 and A-level. So obviously we saw that then brought about this U-turn. I know as members will be aware, then that did have a considerable knock-on then into university places, and you'll have again seen all of that in the news as that occurred over these last few days. That has meant obviously that some significant numbers of young people did eventually receive the better grades, and hopefully grades that enabled them to take their next step in their educational journey. For some, that's meant they did have a place in university for this year. For some of them, that's meant that they've deferred their place in order for them to attend, if you like, their top choice of university, which was mean they'll go next year. But it's obviously been a better result, I think, than we would have had. Well, clearly than we would have had under the previous regime. Quite why. No one had seen this coming, I think, within national government is a surprise. And again, it wasn't something that was confined to, if you like, the UK government, as we know that Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales were all in similar positions, again, with how they were initially proposing to judge exam grades. So moving on to Key Stage 4 in terms of GCSE results, of course, this has all happened prior to results day for Key Stage 4. And so those young people in year 11 who had significant disruption to their education, the vast majority of them all of them, unless they were vulnerable or children of key workers, hadn't been in school since late March. It then meant that they were then going to receive their centre assessed grades and didn't have the concern around the standardised grade algorithm, which obviously made a significant difference to those young people on results day, unless of course they were waiting for BTEC grades, which never arrived. And there's been with Pearson managing that, there's been significant concern around how that's gone about. In terms of how that data then has played out, obviously what we have got, we haven't yet got the full data for Wakefield. We'll hope to have that within the first couple of weeks of schools coming back. As you can imagine, there's been a lot. Schools have been quite busy, I think, over these last few weeks in terms of preparation for reopening. So we'll get that information back from them. We've received information from 11 of the 18 schools so far of our secondary schools, and we'll get the rest fairly quickly. In terms of how that's played out nationally, last year roughly around 70% was the sort of national pass rate around GCSEs. That has increased, as you would expect, I think, with the centre assessed grades to 79%. So quite a significant uplift, but nonetheless, I think in the round, I think that has been the right thing to do. As you'll also know, and this is a rapidly moving situation, that brings me on to examinations for 2021, which we also know has continued to be in the news. And there is a significant national debate going on at the moment as to the timing of those exams and whether those exams might be better being moved back into June to give more teaching time to our new Year 11s who are about to enter their sort of GCS year. Again, a bit of a year group almost that's been slightly forgotten about, because they have been out of school since March 2020. And yet, as it currently stands, will be expected to sit exams at the normal time, having lost a significant amount of teaching time. So there is some concern, I think, from both head teachers and nationally, for national figures, that these young people need a little bit more. They certainly need more teaching time, more time in school to enable them to prepare for what is an exam-based system, because, as you know, Michael Gove initiated some reforms some years ago now, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, which removed coursework, which, as we know now in this current situation, made it slightly harder, I think, around the centre assessed grades and the approach, and led to this algorithm approach, which we know has now been kicked into touch. So the arrangements around 2021, I think, will be interesting. They need to make a fairly swift decision on that, because that clearly has a knock-on effect into results days and university applications, which we don't think, just to be clear, we don't think that those will move at all. So in other words, it will compress the time in which they have to mark and analyse and produce the data from 2021 exams. So that's how it currently sits on the 3rd of September. But we do know that it's highly likely to change in terms of the situation going forward. And I'm obviously very happy to come back and make sure that elected members are fully up to speed, really, with the changes that have taken place in the intervening period now before the next committee meeting, because I'm sure there will be significant changes that we'll be looking to deal with. So I shall stop at that point, and happy to respond to any questions that people might have.
Yeah, thanks, Andy, for that. Clearly, I think we all know that there's been a lot of pressure on schools in all sorts of different ways, and this was obviously just the icing on the cake, so to speak, when all this happened. And I must admit, speaking as a examiner, I'm glad I'm not even facing that sort of timetable now. However, it would be useful if you are able to sort of give us updates on a regular basis as to how this is sort of working itself out through Wakefield.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. As soon as we've got the sort of the data for Wakefield and how that compares to national, we'll clearly bring that back to the committee.
Yeah, much appreciated, Andrew. Sally, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thanks for that, Andy. I think you've been very polite there, David, about icing on the cake. I think it's been an utter mitigating disaster, and my heart goes out to all those youngsters, including my own, who had to go through all that misery, and also for the teachers and parents and carers as well. It didn't need to happen. Just to make members aware, when we talk about centre assessment, what actually happened was I think it was April or May, Andrew will probably be able to confirm this, teachers were asked to rank their students in a particular order. Now, as an ex-teacher, I would have found that incredibly difficult, and I know a lot of my friends were really, really sad about this. And then in some cases, centres then downgraded the grades. So even the results that have come out now are not necessarily the results the youngsters would have got. So it is a mess, and there's no question this case to answer. I know there is going to be an independent inquiry, and that also takes me to the idea of next year, because I think we've got a problem. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know whether we're going to have local lockdowns or whether, we just don't know. And we also know that the stress and the anger, just a general, we need to be thinking about nurturing our young people now. They've gone through what's been a horrible 6 months, like 5 or 6 months. So in terms of looking at how, as I say, how we assess in the future, particularly next year, I'm not sure exams are going to be the right way. I mean, again, it's not something we can decide on today, but it is something for people to think about in terms of how we think about education and how we think about the exam system itself. We all know that it depends on how you were feeling on the day. I'm sure all of us sitting around this room virtually did an exam where they just thought, oh my God, I did it so bad, but actually they knew the knowledge anyway. So I do think we need to think about what's happened this year and learn a lot of things from what's happened, and look at schools reopening in a nurturing sort of way as opposed to what was happening before. I think that's all. And it would be good to have a longer discussion sometime later on with you, Andrew, about all this. But thanks very much for coming along. Let us know.
No, thanks, Sally. And as I say, I reiterate that point that we made earlier, isn't it, which is about the sort of lack of coursework that was there as a body of evidence for, I think, teachers then to look at how they would assess young people. As you say, we have at this stage a very exam-based system. Just building on a couple of the points that were made as well, I think, from David's perspective around the impact on young people. We will also be doing a lot of work around the emotional well-being of young people and supporting them in return to school. So again, I'm really happy once we've sort of got into the term and we've started providing this support work via Educational Psychology Service, the CCG, Future in Mind, and so on, into the emotional well-being of young people. I'm happy to come back to overview and scrutiny really, and give you an update on that side of things really, just so you're assured as to how young people are being appropriately supported, given as we all recognise it's been a very difficult period for them.
Okay, right. Thank you very much, Andy, for that, and appreciate it. It is something that we're going to keep on coming back to as the month unfolds. But I can assure you, Sally, I've written elsewhere about the situation in this particular role, non-political. Okay. So anyway, thank you for that. Can we now move on to? There's no other comments. Oh, Monica, you've got a question. Sorry, I didn't see that. Over to you, Monica.
Sorry, can you hear me, Chair?
Yes.
Andy, I was just wondering how the head teachers of the schools, how you've got together and what their input is into the future. I know that the authority does a lot of work with schools and everything. How the head teachers, what is their point of view? What are their future plans to help the pupils? I think it's good for us as an authority to learn all these things, but the basic movements forward will be done principally by the head and the teachers working together.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Monica. Interestingly, as David knows, I've just where I was before was on a virtual Zoom call with head teachers and colleagues from public health, which was to give them an opportunity to ask questions really and receive information around our local testing system, arrangements around keeping young people, and schools, if you like, COVID secure, and all the work that's been going on around that. That's something that we will repeat in the sort of after the first couple of weeks of term as well. to enable, again, as you say, you know, the communications with schools to be very much listening to some of the issues that they may be dealing with. I think what I would say is I think we've been very fortunate in terms of all of our schools have remained open across the lockdown period. We had in excess of 11,000 pupils out of a cohort of 53,000 back in school before the summer term ended. Which compared very favourably, which was above the national average, and compared very favourably to any of our local neighbours as well. So that was really positive in that I think that school leaders really bought into the fact of making sure that our key worker children, our vulnerable children, and those year groups that were designated by the government were back in school and receiving education. So I think we've been very fortunate in the way that our schools have responded across the district to that. School leaders have engaged with us, CEOs of academy trusts have engaged with us. We've had real positivity across the system. In terms of daily, what I've provided a daily communications update to all setting schools and academies every day since I think sometime in late March, early April. We sort of pared that back a little bit over the summer holiday, and then we're just I've written to schools this week. I'll do the same tomorrow, and then we'll go back to daily for the first 2 weeks of term, and then ease off to a weekly on a Friday, we're thinking. Just depend how things goes. Basically, the purpose of those updates is gives them all the links to the DFE guidance, which obviously, as you know, is fairly numerous and fairly frequent, helps them interpret it, and then we also put in other resources that are out there to support. So, for example, in this week's, we gave a link to the National Autism Society's link to a back-to-school guide for our young people with autism. And again, school leaders, feedback from school leaders is they found that really, really useful every day to know that was coming into school and was a real useful summary of things that were out there that could assist them. As you'll know, all our teams have been in contact with schools on a regular basis across children's social care, early help, and in education inclusion. And we've had some real success stories in terms of vulnerable families really being supported well and feeling that they've had access to education and learning. Our complex care needs team, for example, have done really sterling work in the work in how they've supported some really vulnerable families. And we've had some really positive feedback. So all of that will continue. We'll support schools in making sure that young people who are vulnerable are back in school and appropriately supported. So it's been, despite the testing circumstances that we all recognise, we've certainly benefited, I think, from the strong relationships that we've got across the district with our education leaders, and that's been to everybody's credit, I think.
Thank you, Andrew. I think it's good to hear that positivity from you and moving forward. There's no point in looking back all the time. And I was very pleased to hear that the Academy Trusts are on board with everything as well, which is very reassuring because we never knew how that was going to pan out with them. So thank you very much for that. And it's looking reassuring going forward. A lot of work required, I know, but I'm sure everybody will work hard together to achieve that for the children. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Monica. Kath, over to you.
Thank you. Morning, Andy. You just mentioned the back-to-school guide for children with autism, and that's gone to schools. Has that also gone to parents?
It should have gone to the Parent Carer Forum as well, Kath. I can check with Julie and Sue that they've done that, but certainly that was the intention, that sort of resource is there and accessible to them.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Kevin, you've posted a question. I think that one can go to Andrew Taylor, I think, to deal with Okay. I'd have to sort of say as well, yeah, head teachers have done a sterling job over this whole period of time, and I think it demonstrates the talent that we've got in the district with the role that head teachers have taken on in order to ensure that schools are being safe, and the children are going to be welcomed back next week with regards to them children going to school, because I think the parents, and a lot of parents, do need to be reassured that when the children do go back to school, they're going into that safe environment. But I do know head teachers have worked very hard to ensure that is the case. So thank you for that, Andy. Okay, can we go on to agenda item 8 now, which is the quarterly quality assurance presentation. Is this a verbal report from you, Vicky?
There's another presentation, David, so just bear with me and I'll try and do my stuff again.
Okay, thanks a lot. Oh, you're well experienced now, Vicky, so every confidence in you.
I'm trying. Bear with me. That one.
Yep, we can see
it.
Yep.
Hurrah! Very good. Okay, so I'll just quickly take you through this, and then there's some time for questions, I guess. So my recollection is that last time we were together at Scrutiny Committee, there were a number of questions about the quality assurance framework, and so I was asked to do something in more detail around this. So just very briefly, just to remind you where we were, a couple of years ago, Ofsted told us that managers did not know the full extent of the problems in terms of the practice and the lack of impact for children that the services were having, and in particular commented on the absence of case recording, which had become a pattern, and also reflected on the lack of accurate performance information, which limited the availability of information to help managers understand quality of practice. So we understand, obviously, when we're improving services, that QA activity is really the bedrock of improvements that need to be driven forward. So to try and bring us a bit more up to date, in November 2019, which was our most recent monitoring visit, the visit before COVID hit, Ofsted were much more assured by what we were doing at that time. And this is what they told us then about quality assurance activity in Wakefield. So they told us that case recording was significantly improved and was supporting stronger performance monitoring and quality assurance. The themes identified through our audits were starting to shape and inform the training and learning offer. Senior managers had a good understanding of the areas of practice that required improvement, that routine quality assurance activity was enabling changes and an understanding around frontline social work practice, and that the quality of auditing had been strengthened by that point, that we could now be confident that when we audit, we knew that we were getting the right outcomes from that. We had developed by that point a collaborative auditing system which involved the manager, the moderator and the social worker, and provided sort of live feedback to social workers and tracked through actions that then needed to be corrected. And they told us that we were making good progress based on all of that work towards having a stable and suitably skilled workforce. So just to explain to you our process in more detail, you get a snapshot only within the vital signs report, but our process deals with the process we go through to quality assure involves looking at very many cases in a number of different ways. So to give you a sense of that, we carry out a full audit, and what we mean by that is a 6-weekly cycle that involves a very detailed and thorough look at 25 cases, which is not many, but it is a very detailed full audit which involves a manager reviewing the file, a moderation and a collaborative learning discussion involving the social worker and any other people who were significant in the intervention with that child. Feedback will be obtained from the child, from the family and from partners, and these audits are graded with improvement actions and remedial work identified to be tracked to completion. In addition to that, we carry out very many more audits which we record as DIP samples on management reviews, and they look in thematic areas across a larger number of cases. The themes are then collated, generally with an overview paper, setting out areas of good practice and areas for improvement, and again, feedback to the service team or worker will be provided as required. We have other quality assurance activity that's carried out by people in the system, including case conference chairs and reviewing officers, who in every case that they're responsible for overseeing carry out a midpoint check. So that's generally at the 3-month stage in between the 6 monthly meetings that they're required to chair. They will review the child's file and look for progress in line with the plans that are in place, consider the quality of that and provide feedback to the social worker and/or team manager. And that information is collated and captured within our QA processes. And then we also carry out a range of audits with our partners so that we each hold each other to account. We look on the multi-agency records and understand the impacts of all of the agencies in terms of carrying out statutory functions and working with children. So just in terms of recent activity and focus, in the year March 2019 to March 2020, the annual QA report that we produced demonstrated that we'd looked at 845 children's records during that time. In addition to that, since March 2020 and up to the period at the end of June 2020, we'd sampled an additional 605 children's records. So you can see there that we look at lots of volume, and there's a balance between volume and detail. And the graph there at the bottom demonstrates to you the areas that those audits in March, April and June of this year were carried out in. So you can see there we looked at a range of stuff, including supervision, work done in the MASH, the work to support foster carers, children with special needs, strategy discussions, etc. And again, this is just a list of some of the areas. It's not exhaustive, the things that we look at, the thematic areas that we consider for children. And then in terms of the judgments, so these are the judgments based on those cases that have the very detailed look. This is the 6-weekly full audit cycle. And this shows you where our audit judgments are landing right now. You can see if we go back a year, we were at we had high levels of work in the requires improvement range, and we had around about 25% of our work, 26% of our work being identified as inadequate. If you move forward a year, what you can now see is that we're sustaining a position with much lower levels of work in the inadequate range, so under 10% now for a 6-month period, and also around a third of our work now appearing in the good, now popping up in the good outturn range. Requires improvement has remained relatively stable throughout. What we're now looking for over the next few months is obviously that we continue to increase the amount of work that sits in that good range, and that requires improvement at least sustains, ideally drops a little bit to make way for some of the hopefully improved stuff around good outcomes. But I think what's really heartening to me is that we are consistently now seeing for the last 6 months more work in that good range. And that's also supported by the work that we're doing on the very many other types of audit activity that we don't necessarily grade in this way. So this is just to break that down a bit further for you. You can see in terms of judgments by area of practice, where it is we think we're doing really well and where we believe we've got more work to do. So you can see we've got a little bit of outstanding stuff creeping in there around the quality of the record and around achieving permanent outcomes for children. We've got the biggest sort of proportion of our good work seems to be in the areas around assessment, identifying risk, Management oversight seems to be a strength for us. And also question 9, children are supported to achieve their full potential. What we're saying there is actually more than 50% of the work we're doing looks as though it's good. So that's about impact, making a difference for children. Where we've still got some inadequacy is obviously around the planning and review areas, and a little bit around the quality of the record. But again, where we identify inadequate work, there will be a series of actions put in place that are tracked through to completion with those staff. In terms of reporting and governance, so how do we demonstrate what we do in this regard? We produce a quarterly report throughout the year, the last one of which is an annual report. That collates the learning from all of the feedback processes that we have around children's social care work, including from complaints and compliments, from the work of the independent reviewing officers, any information we've got from peer reviews and other external scrutiny, and also young person-led challenge. For example, we've done some work with the young people around carrying out a mystery shopper exercise in the mesh a couple of times over the last year. The Directorate Management Team and the Improvement Board receive copies of all of those reports and exercise the relevant scrutiny. And those reports then give us a chronological, as you can see today, view around the progress that we're making and the activity that we've carried out. The reports are also shared in the relevant detail with the services and teams, and then the themes and issues help us to drive and develop the learning offer, so that the learning we provide to staff is responsive really to the areas of practice we see we need to focus on. And then just to bring us right up to date, the DFE commented specifically on the QA work and the work that we do to engage social workers and managers in that when they were with us a few weeks ago. And what they reported is that staff told them that they routinely experience quality assurance activity, that they know it happens, they're engaged with it, it's a regular feature of their work here. And that it's a positive thing, that they actually quite welcome it, which I was really, really pleased with. And they told DFE colleagues that they receive feedback, and they receive feedback both positively in relation to good practice, but also in areas where practice could be improved. So even better if we did more of that, or if we thought in this way, it might make more of a difference. And we're really clear that they welcomed the learning conversations and the opportunity to further improve. So just by way of a summary, what we believe now is that this process is very well embedded. We believe it's robust. We think it produces an accurate representation of practice within the district. We believe that this really provides for a range of quality assurance methods, which again gives us a balance between detailed review and detailed feedback and volume, which is what we need to achieve in Wakefield. We know now that outcomes from audits are regularly fed back and inform the improvement activity that we know we need to take. And we believe we can see now that those are beginning to make a difference qualitatively as well as in terms of improved KPIs. But obviously, as we always say, there's still more work to do. We're on a path. We think we're probably on the right stage of the path for the point in our improvement journey, but obviously more work to do as the outcomes demonstrate. And so that was it for the presentation.
Thank you very much.
No questions.
Any questions from committee, please? Right, I will ask one then, whilst people are maybe recovering. You know where you've seen the drop in good from 38 to 32%? Yeah. At what point then? Obviously, that's still a significant increase from the previous years and that. At what point then would you see that any cause for concern would arise on that trajectory?
I guess when I look at that, what I see, David, is that we've had an increase in the good work that's being carried out over the last 6 months. So, of course, it's dropped from 38 to 32 or 33. I've not got it in front of me now. But there's been a slight decline from one audit cycle to the next in the good outturn. But it's still way above where we were, at previous points in the improvement journey. And I guess what I will say is this is not a precise science, and there will be fluctuations. There'll be slight peaks and troughs with this, just as we see in the quantitative data from month to month. I think what I'm really assured about is that the inadequate work has dropped and sustained that drop. And again, what I would say is every local authority, even good and outstanding local authorities, will come across a piece of inadequate casework from time to time. So we're not seeing huge deficits in casework when we look at it. We're not seeing children left at risk. What we are saying is that there are things that need to be done to expedite the outcomes for those children. We can be more effective. And so when would we be concerned? I think if we were seeing lots of a significant increase in inadequate work, I would be concerned if I was seeing children on audit who we were leaving at risk and we weren't safeguarding in any way. I'd be concerned if we were seeing significant declines in recording practice or significant declines in management oversight, because again, they're the cornerstones of building improvement work. And I would be concerned if we had a significant decline now away from the improved good levels of work that we've been achieving. I think just to put it into context slightly further for you, what we are seeing with the requires improvement outturns is that they are very largely now at the higher end of requires improvement. So we have a scale that we grade on. Anything above, I think it's a 7 is good. And you've got to get 9 or 10 to be outstanding. We're seeing the vast majority now of our requires improvement outturns being at the higher end of the requires improvement scale. So we're moving on, we're pushing on good much more than we were.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Kath was going to ask a question, but she has said that you've already answered, so well done, Vicky. Okay. Right. Right, if there's no more questions on the quality assurance, can I thank you very much for that detailed response for us? And this is very reassuring, but equally, you know that sometimes you only need a couple of, bad files, and it sort of does throw things out a little bit. So, well aware of those sort of issues.
And so, it is random, David. So, of course, we could pick up on a couple of, not so good files in any given month. I think it has to be seen over a period.
There is an element of randomness, isn't there, about it? Yeah, okay. If there's no more questions, then can we move on to the vital signs report? For purpose of time and clawing back time, I won't go through any sort of summaries. I will assume that everybody has read through the vital signs report. I don't know if you want to be saying anything about it in the first instance, or should we go straight to members' comments or questions? If there's anything you need to draw attention to.
Not really. I think I mentioned it fairly extensively anyway at the beginning, David, yeah. So I'm quite happy if people just want to ask questions.
Okay. Are there any questions then for the vital signs report? Right. Yes. Catherine. Kath.
Morning, Vicky again.
Morning.
Let me just get my papers. On KPI 1, looking back at exclusions, the exclusions that were in place in March, what's happened to those children? So if a child was excluded and it were a permanent exclusion, but there hadn't been a governor's meeting, so what's happened then? Or children that were on I
can answer that question, Kath. Yeah. So if a school issued a permanent exclusion but they haven't had the governing body meeting, and as you know, across lockdown period, that was all, those requirements were lifted. So in other words, we didn't have lots and lots of young people being excluded. So that will now be picked up as the new term starts and schools reopen again. We'll be back into, if you like, normal regulations around how exclusions are managed. But we've had a very, we haven't had permanent exclusions across the lockdown period, and any that hadn't had a governing body meeting at that point were obviously paused. As you know, the vast majority of children weren't in school anyway, in that sense. But the compulsion on the schools is still to provide that virtual learning.
Thank you.
Okay.
Will that exclusion that now carry on for September?
Yeah, so it doesn't remove the exclusion in that sense. But what it does mean is that it kicks back into the normal regulations around it and how we would then deal with that young person.
Thank you. I've got another question. I've got another question, David. That it might be Andy that answers. If I can ask it now, please.
Go on then.
Don't sound.
Well, I'm going to ask a question. That's why. Go on. Carry on. You go first.
KPI 9. When we're looking at EHCP plans, and it's gone up during COVID. So I'm looking at now, have we got enough trained staff to look after these children in place? Have they been put in place by September? Or are we looking at starting to put them in place now? So, and have we enough, not just staff, but have we enough places in schools or resource centres for the needs of the children within the HCP plan? Thank you.
Right, okay. There's several questions there, I think. First thing to say around EHCPs, obviously you'll see the percentage figure and how that, in terms of them being dealt with within the 20 weeks, which is the target, and we've exceeded that target at some point, and then just recently dipped slightly below that target, and that's been because we've had 3 or 4 of those have gone to tribunal, which again increases the sort of timeline on that. But in the vast majority of plans are being worked through within 20 weeks. In terms of then within those plans, is the provision there to provide that plan? Yes, it is. And then thirdly, as you'll know, there's always pressure on places. It is a movable feast. At this current point in time, there is sufficiency within the system. However, that is dependent on the complexity of someone's needs. And what we do know is that the more complex a need a young person has, the harder it is to find the placements within district for that, and that's where we end up with some of our more expensive independent placements outside of district. We're not unusual in that. That's a national issue. But we're also hopeful that the work that we've been doing around inclusion as part of the Wakefield Families Together approach will increase, if you like, the continuum of support for schools and enable more young people to be educated within mainstream education and not have to be placed into specialist and indeed independent provision. I think it's also just worthwhile just saying the fantastic job that our special schools did and continue to do across this COVID-19 period. They've all remained open. They've all supported our most vulnerable families in an extremely positive way. And I just would like to sort of record that formally. I've been so impressed with the teams, both within the schools and our teams that support our vulnerable families. They've done a fantastic job.
Right, thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Andy. That's brilliant news. Have the resource centres stayed open as well as the schools?
Yeah, we've had resource centres open throughout the period. I'm not saying that we've not had odd days where we've had to have closures for odd outbreaks and things like that, which we have occasionally had. I know that one of the special schools had a short number of days where it had to close, but in the main we've had everything's been open all the way through.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Stuart, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question about return to school and the reported concerns around the upsurge in reports of concerns for child safety right across that may occur in line with that. I was wondering about contingencies for dealing with any upsurge, and that's also dealing with the upsurge, but also the support for people who may be picking up on those concerns, or children sharing them with teachers, adults and other frontline workers.
Okay, I think I probably addressed this previously, but I'll say some of that again. We haven't in Wakefield. We may get a surge, obviously, and we don't know how big that will be. But I think if you look at the KPI number 1 there, which shows you the volume of referrals into our system throughout the last few months, you can see actually that they've stayed relatively steady. We had a little dip, but we aren't very far below what we would expect to be. So we think most of our children have remained visible to us. If we do get an increase, if you scroll down to KPI 3, which shows you the open children's social care cases, you can see that our system is looking fairly healthy. So we're by no means at the peak of where we've been in the last year. And lots of that has been about the way we've maximised really on the use of our time during COVID, when people have been working from home, probably not travelling between meetings and things like that as they would have been. They've spent much more time in ensuring that they are efficiently moving work through the system. So we've, and we know that because again, we've sampled the cases, we've looked at the reasons why caseloads are lower. So if we do get some increase in activity, it would appear that our system is going to be able to deal with that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, it's very helpful. And when you mentioned earlier on about 80% being able to maintain face-to-face contact, I think that was really reassuring on that those things should come forward. I think the other thing around that is the lessons learnt out of this about how working's being done and the efficiencies that I'm sure you'll be taking forward and reflecting on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we know there's some things that, notwithstanding, it's been very difficult, that we'll want to keep hold of. It's a bit of a balance, though. I think we're all really clear that given what we do face-to-face has to be in place some of the time. And we've maintained most of that for as many children as possible.
And just a comment on that, Chair, if I may. There was a report around, I think it was working with children with speech difficulties, and there was some resistance around not wanting to do this online, wanting to do it face-to-face. But the children involved in that have found some real benefits from working online as well. So I think that with some efficiency in our working, but also our children have found benefits in this new way of working as well.
Yeah, they have, and I can confirm that that's the case. Some of our children in care actually have said that they've really welcomed having more contact with social workers, and some of that's been virtual. We've been quite old-fashioned, I guess, actually, to this point, in that we count visits, we count direct contact back via a visit, which is all necessary because we have to see the environment, the physical environment that children are living in. But also, you know, it can very helpfully be supplemented through other means, and we've found that.
Great, thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you, Stuart. Vicky, can I pick up on one thing, please, from on KPI 5, percentage of visits to children complete on time. In the light of the COVID-19 situation, a small percentage of visits have been carried out by video, etc., etc., etc. Sorry, how are you able to reassure that when that has taken place, that the child is still in a safe environment?
Yeah, I guess what I can say about that is that was very largely happening to the extent that it happened, which, as I've said, is not in significant proportion, but most of those visits were virtually were happening in the early stages of the pandemic, when people were quite concerned, when staff were concerned, when messaging was very clear around avoiding direct contact and staying 2 meters apart and all of those things. And what we did is provide some guidance to staff around almost a risk assessment, a very simple risk assessment document really, which enabled them to balance the risks to the child in relation to safeguarding with the reasonable and proportionate risks in relation to COVID to children and their families. So in those circumstances, we're fairly clear that when visits have not been done in person, there's been a specific reason. Either the family believed that they were symptomatic, or the staff members believed that there was more of a risk to the family because they were vulnerable through sort of physical characteristics, and so made the assessment in the early stages that direct contact was probably not necessary at that point. And all of those that rationale is recorded on the children's files. It is in line with the permissions that we were given also by the DFE around the usual carrying out of statutory functions. They did relax some of the requirements, but we've been very careful not to overuse that relaxation in Wakefield. What we also did then is sample that work. So you can see on the QA report, we sampled somewhere between 200 and 300 children's cases, looking specifically at visits and trying to understand the extent to which when people were recording a virtual visit, was it still qualitative? And I think what we saw is that in very large part they were. Where they weren't, we did something about that. And what we are now assured of is that with very rare exception, the visits are face-to-face. You know, we've moved back to a position of carrying out face-to-face visits for just about all children.
Good. I think that's obviously that's a very important reassurance, isn't it? From past situations, albeit a long time ago now. But I think it's given what obviously has been going on, and I think, and I am aware as well, as it has been said to me, that social workers have been very visible in terms of making those visits. So that is something that has been said to me. So I think that's still very positive. That good quality work is still carrying on. So thank you very much for that, Vicky. Are there any other questions on this part? Okay. So we'll draw a line under agenda item 9. Thank you very much, Vicky. You have done more than enough work this morning in terms of having to be in the hot seat, and I'm sure Beate is enjoying her holiday.
I'm sure she is.
Yes, skillfully avoiding all the quarantine places, obviously. Anyway, okay, so thanks for that. Can we go on to agenda item 10, which is the work programme update? Can I thank Lynn, who's done a lot of work on this programme, because as you know, we made the decision to go onto a 2-year programme, so there was clear consistency and continuity, and I know that she's obviously had meetings with Stephen and his team to ensure that we have got all things covered. Are there any comments with regards to the work programme update? Monica, Cynthia, Monica first.
Thanks, Chair. When we look at February 21, I don't know if this request can be made now. Could we do a piece on childminders, on registration and regulations within the Wakefield district? Because it says early years education and best start, and to me, best start. Childminders play a big part in that. Not all children are able to access a nursery or a playgroup. So would it be possible to do a piece of work on childminders, please?
Right. Thank you very much, Monica. Lynn, have you got anything to say on that? So you're all right with that? I think you have to a very fair point, that Monica. So yes, you're absolutely right.
I think that's fine, Chair. It was likely to be included anyway, I suspect.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Because in fact, interestingly, I was speaking to a child manager a couple of weeks ago and about how they were finding everything and how they were having to adapt to things. So yes, I think it's a good point. Cynthia.
Yeah, either February 21 or it could come in April 21. Can we look at how schools are working with children who are presenting as transgender?
Yes. Well, I say that with an air of experience on the matter.
Right.
So it was one of the things it was something that I was given as a responsibility back in about 2005, and I learned. great deal on that
Yeah.
subject at the time,
Yeah.
and realised then that all the best work, all the best research had actually been done in the States, and there hadn't been anything at that point in this time. So yes, I think that's something that we can add on to it. Yes.
Yeah. It could come in April if you can't fit it in February, but that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stuart.
Yes, Chair. Just before the world changed somewhat, what dominating our discussions was Brexit. And I remember you gave us a bit of an update at the start of one of the meetings back earlier this year. I was just wondering whether sort of coverage of Brexit still exists on the horizon, and the amount of coverage of unaccompanied children and the problems that Kent have been having, and where they maybe said whether we just need to have a look at that at some stage now this is affecting Wakefield.
Yeah. Okay. I think that could be sort of come into some of the work that's obviously done by Vicky's team. But obviously, yes, that we can add that on as well. Yes. Thank you. Is there anything else? I know Kevin looks as if he's typing something at the moment, but nothing's come through. Right, Sally. Sally Kincaid.
I'm here, thanks for that. Actually, I was interviewed by Kent BBC a few weeks ago about fostering young companies, so I'm happy to contribute to the last bit. I wondered if we could also have a look at thinking about the transgender stuff. It's really important, but also the Black Lives Matter in terms of how schools are adapting their curriculums over the next period, given everything that's happened.
Yeah, okay. Have we got a note of that, Lynn?
Yes, got that.
Okay, thanks a lot. Right, so there's one extra thing that I want to add on. If you can all look at agenda page 35, which is Appendix 2, which is the Terms of Reference extract. The bottom third says responding to the skills challenge in the district, including measures being undertaken to ensure education providers are providing an adequate variety of courses. I think given how, as obviously Stuart said before, that the landscape has changed somewhat, and given the pressure that's now taking place on young people being able to get apprenticeships, for example, and then with the announcement yesterday of the government's Kickstart programme, I have already spoken to Councillor Darren By, obviously is the cabinet member responsible for regeneration and skills, to look at this. But I think I would like a small subgroup, therefore I will be asking for volunteers to look at this particular area, because it is one that we have not had a chance to look at in any detail. But I think given everything that's happening now, that we need to do that. So that's something I'm highlighting now as something that we will need to be doing from about October time, as the Kickstart programme more detail arises, and obviously the council's response to it as well. So yes, I have already had a brief conversation with Councillor Byford about it, but I think it's something we do need to look at as a committee, but do it as through a subgroup. So if anybody wishes to volunteer or be part of that, I'd be more than welcome. Are there any other comments or questions about this agenda item? Okay, so can we move on then to agenda item 11, which is the executive leaders forward plan. And I will now basically throw various pieces of paper in different directions to get hold of it. And it does come up with, to confirm capital funding for 2 modular new bases at the base, Carlton, and 25759 Barnsley Road, and the purchase of 1 self-contained building from WDH, Stanley Street, which is sort of part obviously, it covers other aspects of what we have been talking about this morning. So that is the one that affects us. So the date and time of the next meeting is the 29th of October at 10 a.m. and will be held remotely. Thank you, everyone. If there's any other further comments I might have before I close the meeting? Anything else anybody wishes to say or make comments about? Stuart? I'll wait for the two people who are typing at the moment. Oh, right, thank you. Stuart, thank you very much. I must say there was slight nerve this morning about doing it this way. Right, and yes, stay safe, everyone. It is noticeable that it has come up this morning that we have just hit the highest rate of infection since the end of May. So yes, please, everybody, do be careful. So once again, I'll say next meeting is on the 29th of October at 10 a.m. and again will be held remotely. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance, and I shall have to now ask Kate to switch off. Thank you all very much.